Okay, so this is going to be the third lesson in Unit 5 where we're talking about scatter plots and data analysis. So you can see the unit right here. And then this is the third lesson or the third handout. So it'll say handout 3. Again, like I'll say at the beginning of every video, I think that it would be much more beneficial for you if you have the paper copy and you can fill out your notes and take notes and work through things with me while you're watching the video. If you're absent, I get that you don't necessarily have that opportunity, but if you know that you're going to be absent, you can always come see me the day before you're going to be gone or whenever, and I usually have everything printed out and I could go ahead and get that for you, and I'd be happy to do that. So don't forget, this is going to be the third handout. You should have scatter plots and trend lines at the top of this packet that you're getting ready to work through. If you're wanting to follow along, you can go to your content library, click on Unit 5, make sure you're over here on November 1st. October has now gone, November is here, and it's going to say scatter plots and trend lines. You can click on homework, and you can click on the November 1st scatter plots and trend lines homework, and then you can work through that later. Okay, I have not given y'all any extra credit for this unit yet. That will come here in a couple of weeks. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and dive right into it. I'm going to make this full screen and we will get started. So it says trend lines. Okay, when scatter plots demonstrate a linear relationship, so in this first blank here, we're going to write linear relationship. Oh, my slate is off. Give me a second. Very good. So it's going to demonstrate a linear relationship. A straight line can be used to show that the general pattern of the data. A trend line or line of best fit is a straight line that should lie as close as possible to the points of data on the scatter plot. Okay, so again, we're going to kind of go back through this. We're talking about trend lines here. Whenever the scatter plot demonstrates a linear relationship, okay, so whenever it says that there's no association, we can't use a trend line. So it's only if it's linear. It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. We can draw a straight line through the data so that we can interpret it. A straight line or a line of best fit, it is a straight trend line that should lie as close as possible to the points, and it should follow the same trend of those points. Okay, so again, I think it's easier to explain things as we're working through them. So let's go ahead and look at number 1. It says for 1 through 4, write yes or no to describe whether or not the line is a good trend line. And then we're going to explain. So let's take a second and look at 1. So go ahead and pause your video, look at it and things like that, and then come up with what you think. Is this going to be a good trend line or not? And then we can come back to the video. Okay, so do you think it's a good trend line or not? Hopefully your answer is no, because if we're looking at this data, the data going from left to right has a positive trend, right? If I drew my own trend line through it, it would follow the data as closely as possible. And this trend line that's been drawn for us has a negative association, and it's not going through as closely as possible all of the data. So we're going to say no. Number 2, we have a trend line that's negative and our data is negative. That's good. It is going in between all the points and it follows the points very closely in the scatter plot. So I'm going to say yes, it is a good trend line. For 3, I want you to go ahead and pause the video and look at this graph, number 3, and tell me if you think that it would be a good trend line or not. Okay, so you should be back on the video. And this might trip you up because you're saying, oh, it's going through 1, 2, 3, 4 points, and it's negative. This Scatter plot seems to have this negative trend to it, so I'm going to say yes, it is a good trend line. But actually it's not, because we want our trend line to go in between the data, right? So I'm going to draw my own trend line. It is negative, but it should look more like the line that I drew that went in between all of the data. You want about half the points above your line and half the points below your line. Does that make sense? Half the points above it and half the points below it. So we're going to say no. This last one, go ahead and pause your video and look at this graph for 4 and tell me if you think that it's going to be a good trend line. Okay, hopefully you said that this was not a good trend line, because again, we want about half the points above it and half the points below it. Okay, and this trend line, it had a majority of the points were up above it. So we're going to say no, not a good trend line. Okay. And then this next one, it says writing equations of trend lines. Okay. We're going to choose any 2 points on the trend line and set up a ratio of rise over run to find the, come on y'all, it says rise over run. What does that automatically make us think about? It should make us think about slope, right? We just did that for a whole unit. Okay, so rise over run to find the slope of the line, or m. Okay, look at the y-axis. Okay, if it says y-axis, to find the y-intercept, this should all be pretty familiar, of the line, or b. Use these to write an equation in the slope-intercept form. You should be able to get out that golden math chart that I gave all of you. And you should be able to find your slope-intercept form, or maybe you have it memorized, and we know that that is y equals mx plus b. So what we're doing is we're taking these past 2 lessons where we talked about scatter plots and graphing scatter plots and looking at the association, and we're basically combining it with the slope-intercept form and finding slope. Okay, but the thing that I really want you to pay attention to here, and I'm actually going to change my color to red because I want to underline this in red. It says any 2 points on the trend line. Okay, I want you to box that in, highlight it. I want you to make sure that you have on the trend line highlighted or boxed in on your notes, because it's very important that you don't just go and pick 2 points on your graph. You have to find 2 points that are on the trend line, and then you can find your slope. Okay, I'm going to switch back to black, and then we're going to go ahead and do an example of that. So it says write an equation slope-intercept form for each of the trend lines below. So they've already given us a line, and we're just going to find the slope of the line and write the equation. Pretty simple. And we know that we need our m, which is our slope, and our b. Okay, so the easiest one is almost always going to be the b on my graph. So I'm going to box in my y-intercept. It is crossing this y-axis at 8, so my y-intercept is going to be 8. Very simple. Okay, now I need to pick 2 solid points. Remember, I made you box in or highlight where it says on the trend line up here. And so we need to make sure that we find 2 points that are on the trend line. Okay, and they might not be given to us, but that's okay. So we've got a solid point here that's crossing, and we have a solid point down here. Okay, I'm going to need to draw my rise over my run, my right triangle. Always check your axis. Remember, check your axis to see what they're counting by. They're both counting by 1, so we're good. I have a rise of 1 and a run of 3. So my slope is going to have a rise of 1, a run of 3. But what do I need to make sure that I always go back and check other than my axis when I'm finding slope? I need to check to see what kind of slope is it. Is it going to be a negative slope, a positive slope? Okay, this line going from left to right is decreasing, which would make it a negative slope. So we need to make sure that we have a negative 1/3. And also the data on the scatter plot the trend has a negative association, so we should have a negative slope. Okay, then we're going to take our m and our b and we're going to write it in slope-intercept form, which will be y equals negative 1/3 x plus 8. Okay, where this 8 is my b and this 1/3 is my m. Not too bad, right? Moving on to number 6. I'm still going to be writing an equation, so I know I need an m and a b. Again, when I'm looking at a graph, I know that my b is almost always super easy to find if we just look at the y-axis. This line's crossing the y-axis at 100, so I know that my y-intercept or my b is going to be 100. Very good. Then I have to pick 2 points on my graph on my trend line. Do not just go and randomly select 2 points. They have to be on the trend line, okay? So I have a solid point here and a solid point here on my trend line. I'm going to have a rise over a run. Every time you draw your triangle, you should think, oh, before I check my rise and my run, I need to check my axis and see what they're counting by. Here, they're going up by 25 is what it looks like to me. We can fill them in to make sure. 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 50. So they're counting up by 25 each time. And then the bottom is still counting up by 1. So it should have a rise of 25 because the y-axis is going up by 25. And then a run of 2. Okay, rise of 25, run of 2. So I'm going to come to my slope and put 25 over 2. Then, just like in number 5, we need to go back and see what kind of slope it is. From left to right, this is increasing. Okay, so it's going to be a positive slope. So I don't even have to put anything there. And then we always want to simplify. You can go to your calculator and put in 25 divided by 2, and it will give you a slope of 12.5. Or it should. Then we're going to take our m and our b and write it in slope-intercept form, which was y equals negative, I'm sorry, not negative, that's a positive slope. It would be 12.5 x plus 100. Okay, where this 100 is my b and the 12.5 is my slope. Some of you might be saying, oh, Mr. Lawson, could I just take these 2 points and use the slope formula? Absolutely, and I'll do that in number 7 so that you can see how to find your slope using the slope formula if you need some review there. So let's move on to number 7. Still looking to write an equation. I'm going to have a slope and a y-intercept. I'm going to go check my y-axis to find my y-intercept. It's crossing the line at, I'll have to go see what they're counting by. It looks like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. Looks like that y-intercept is going to be at 45. So my b will equal 45. Okay. I'll have to find my slope. And I said that I'm going to use the slope formula. You can go refer back to the golden mathematic chart. It'll say slope of a line, and it will tell you that in order to find the slope of the line, you can do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, and so I can pick 2 points off of this graph. There's one here and there's one here. Make sure again it's on the trend line. You don't want to just go select 2 random points. You want to make sure that you have 2 points on the trend line. The first one is at 2.25 and the second one is at 3.15. And then the next step is always going to be to label your point. So I have a x1 and a y1. I have a x2 and a y2. Okay, I'll rewrite my slope formula. y2 is 15 minus 25, which is my y1, over 3 minus 2. When I simplify that, 3 minus 2 is going to give me 1 over 15 minus 25 will give me a negative 10. And when I simplify that, my slope would equal a negative 10. So m equals negative 10. Okay, or I could still do rise over run over my run. I know that my rise is going to be 10 because it's going up by 5s when I check my axis. So 5, 10 over a run of 1. So my slope could have also been 10 over 1. Going from left to right, it's negative, so it still would have given me a negative 10 over 1, and I would have gotten my same slope of negative 10. It doesn't really matter which one you use. You'll get the same answer. Then I'll write it in slope-intercept form, which is y equals negative 10, and our slope is going to be negative going from left to right, so that checks out. X plus 45, which is my y-intercept. So I'm going to label that B and that M so that I know that I have them in the right spot. Okay, so now we're going to flip over to the next side of the page, which should be number 8. And so I'm going to scroll down. To find the slope of the trend line below, Riley chose the points 180 and 230. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and plot those 2 points, because remember, if we look back up here at our notes, what did I have you highlight or box in? It must be on the trend line. So if she's going to use these 2 points, they must be 2 points that are on the trend line. So I'm going to go plot 180. 1 up 80. Oh, so she chose this point, not on the trend line. Doesn't seem like Riley was listening to her teacher, huh? 2 and up 30. So these 2 points that I just circled are the 2 points that Riley chose to use to find her slope. Are those 2 points on the trend line? No. So will these points help her to write the correct equation? No, because they're not on the trend line. So we're going to say, to answer A, no, because they are not on the trend line. Okay, and so we're still going to have to find the equation of that trend line, so I'm going to need to find my slope and my y-intercept. My y-intercept is when this line crosses the y-axis. It's crossing at 90, so my y-intercept will be 90. Pretty easy. And then my M, I'm going to have to find 2 solid points on the trend line, which is what Riley didn't do here. So I'm going to do a solid point here and a solid point back up here. My rise, I'll have to go down and then run over. Again, check your axis. They're counting by 10s here and 1s on the x-axis. So my rise would be 10, 20, right? Because they're going up by 10s, 10, 20 over a run of 1. So it would be 20 over 1. Then we need to go back and see what kind of slope it is. From left to right, it's decreasing. So it's going to be a negative 20 over 1. And then I'll just write my equation. Y equals, my slope was a negative 20, x plus 90. Okay, where the 90 was my y-intercept and the 20 was my slope, or the negative 20. Okay. So looking at number 9, it says which of the following scatter plots could have a trend line with an equation of y equals 2x plus 5. Okay, so it says could, and I know that it's going to give me 2 pieces of information here because this is written in slope-intercept form, so it's going to tell me my slope and my y-intercept. My slope is in front of my x, or it's my coefficient, which is a positive 2. So my slope equals positive 2. My y-intercept is going to be a positive 5. So if my slope is positive, the trend association should be positive. So A, going from left to right, it is decreasing, so it would have a negative slope, and that is not what we want. B going from left to right is increasing, so that's good. C is also increasing, good. But D is also a decreasing, which would have a negative slope. We can go ahead and get rid of that one. Now, what does it mean that my B is going to equal 5? And I'll rewrite that so it's easier to see. B equals 5. Well, this line is going to cross my y-axis at 5. Okay? And if I did a trend line, a better trend line for B, where does it look like this line is crossing my y-axis? Oh, at the origin, which would be 0, 0. So my B would have been 0, making answer choice B incorrect. Whereas C, if these were counting up by 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that would be a much better assumption, right? Very good. So C would be my answer choice. And then it says explain your answer choice. We just did with all of our work, so we don't have to worry about going back through, okay? And then we're going to look at number 10. It says, Miss Hamilton surveyed some of her students by asking how many minutes they spent studying for their math test and the score they made on the math test. The results are shown below. Well, first of all, before we even start doing any work, what kind of association can we predict? The amount they study versus the score for their math test. Well, the more you study, the better score you should make, right? Right. So that's going to be a positive association because as one goes up, the number of minutes studied, the other will also go up, which would be the score. Okay? So A says, what is the slope of the trend line? And I know in order to find slope, which is M, I'll have to do rise over run. So I need to pick 2 points on this trend line, 1 and 2. Okay, I need to do a rise over a run. My rise, they're counting by tens, and that would be one space, so it would be 10 over a run. It looks like they're counting by fives, and so they're going over 3, which would be 5, 10, 15. So I would put my rise 10 over my run 15. And then I need to go back and check to see if this is positive or negative. It's increasing from left to right. That's going to be positive. And then I need to simplify it. I can divide the top and the bottom by 5. 10 divided by 5 is going to give me 2. 15 divided by 5 is going to give me 3. So my slope is going to be a positive 2/3. Okay, and my rise, my vertical change was the test score. So it's going to be a rise of 2 on my test score for every 3, which is my run, minutes studied. And then it says B, what does the slope mean in the context of the situation? So it means, since it's a constant rate of change, that the score will increase by 2 for every 3 minutes that you study. Okay. And then it says C, what is the y-intercept of the trend line? We know the y-intercept is going to be my B, and that's a pretty easy one to find because it's where the line crosses the y-axis. So this line is crossing the y-axis at 60. So I know that my y-intercept is going to be 60. I don't have to do anything else to that number, so I can go ahead and write it in my blank. And what does the y-intercept mean in the context of the situation? Well, how many minutes have they studied where my y-axis is being crossed at 60? 0. So at 0 minutes studied, if you don't study for your test, you're going to make an average of 60, right? So for D, we could say if you don't study, there's a good chance, ooh, my pen didn't want to write there. There is a good chance you will make an average of 60. Or you could just say average 60. Okay, and then we're going to write an equation. We already found our slope, m, which was here, and our y-intercept, 60. So we just need to fill those into our equation. Y equals 2/3 x plus 60, because we know that our equation is going to be y equals mx plus b. Right? Very good. So again, we're just going to be piecing together our scatter plots with our positive associations, negative associations. You know, if we had some outliers, if we looked over here at 10, this score of studying for only 5 minutes and still making 100, that's going to be an outlier. That's not your average student, right? And then we're going to be using slope and y-intercepts to write our equations in slope-intercept form, which we learned in Unit 3 and 4, and that's all fine. So make sure that you go back and watch the last couple of videos if you haven't yet. They're going to be on YouTube, and there's also going to be links to those in OneNote next to the handouts. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at dlawson@ssisd.net. I'd be happy to answer any questions. If you're still really struggling with finding slope using rise over run or the slope formula or understanding what the y-intercept means, please email me. I'd be happy to make another YouTube video, kind of a little tutorial about how to find those, and emailing it back to you and posting it for the rest of the class too, because there's a good chance that if you're still struggling with a concept, that somebody else in your class is too, and so by you speaking up, you could definitely help them out. Okay? So, again, if you have any questions, email me. But other than that, that's going to be the end of this lesson and the video.